Well, we translated the Paris Agreement into our climate policy framework, which sets out that we will be climate neutral by 2045 at the latest. And as part of that framework, we also enacted a climate law, and each government which comes into office needs to present a climate policy action plan, as we call it. So this government came into office about a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, and they presented their climate policy action plan just before Christmas, setting out how they will then be contributing to achieving the net zero target by 2045 at the latest. So each successive government has to come forward with this kind of climate policy action plan to present how the targets will be reached. Additionally, the government also needs to present annually to Parliament what kind of actions has been taken to ensure that the targets are being met. We have also set up, as part of our climate policy framework, a climate policy council, which every year scrutinizes the kind of policies which have been put in place, and the reports are usually quite critical of government action, so meaning that more needs to be done. So Sweden, like any country globally, needs to do more. But also there is I can mention another example of what we call the Fossil-Free Sweden initiative, which was set up I think 8 years ago now, where the government has been working together with the private sector to develop roadmaps for transition of the Swedish economy. So I think there are 22 different roadmaps which have been set in place, which each of them outline then how various sectors contribute to our net zero target. And those roadmaps are now being revised, partly because we see that the transition is actually happening quicker than we saw just a couple of years ago, partly due to technological development where new solutions are being made available. Well, I think as in any kind of dialogue on climate action or any topic, I mean, obviously there are some issues that a government would agree with, some others which a government might not agree with. But I think a key element here is that kind of conversation is taking place. That there is possibility to have that kind of dialogue and see what kind of various policy options are there available. But then, of course, in the end, the kind of policies which are being put in place is, of course, up to the government to and also to sort of to enact those to ensure that we are meeting the kind of targets which we set ourselves. I think we're trying to see, basically having as much partnership as possible. I mean, as some have been saying, that we need leadership when it comes to climate action, but partnership is also part of leadership to make sure that we're building those kind of alliances, both sort of within the country, but also with our European partners and globally. I mean, we are, for example, from a Swedish perspective, we are members of some 80 global climate initiatives, which are sort of targeting various parts of the sector. Some are focusing on the energy transition. For example, we have something we call the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance for a number of countries who are then focusing on phasing out oil and gas. We have something we call the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which also focusing obviously on phasing out coal, but also then sort of in the other end of the spectrum, looking to phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, looking to enhance the deployment of renewable energy, but also looking to the transportation sector. We, together with India, we lead something we call the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. Gathering now I think some 40 members, both companies and countries, who are working together to develop, again, roadmaps for industry transition in those particular countries as a way sort of to strengthening those kind of partnerships. And I think that's really, we're seeing so many different types of alliances gaining ground, which is really helpful for us all to be accelerating the pace of the transition to net zero. Well, definitely, I think that's something which we as countries need to be exploring those ways to see how we can be working together. I've been so happy to be here in Rabat now today to have those kind of conversations, both with sort of Moroccan counterparts and ministries, but also meeting Moroccan youth, meeting various types of Moroccan actors to see how we can expand on that partnership. And I'm so impressed by the kind of action which is taking place in Morocco, but also, of course, being very open about the kind of challenges that any country faces when it comes to the transition to net zero. I mean, we as a global community are lagging behind. We need to do much more, not only when it comes to mitigation, but also when it comes to adaptation, to sort of meeting the challenges we're seeing already today, and by those communities which are impacted by climate change. So, and it's by working together, both as communities, as countries, between various types of societal actors, that we can make sure to accelerate that kind of transition that we need. I hope that we can find those ways sort of to strengthen that kind of collaboration between Sweden and Morocco, both as individual countries, but also between various actors within our country. So, for example, strengthening youth engagement between various types of youth actors, but also strengthening business collaboration. And when we talk to Swedish business actors, for example, they see the transition very much as a business opportunity, finding new kind of business models and exploring their production methods to make sure that they are meeting the kind of requirements which basically the Paris Agreement sets up. So exploring that kind of collaboration as well, and seeing how Swedish and Moroccan companies can be working together to strengthen their collaboration in building the kind of climate action that we need, and looking to, for example, investments in infrastructure. What kind of sustainable transport methods can we find? We have Swedish companies who can be providing solutions when it comes to electrification, for example, but also the kind of solutions we're hearing from Moroccan actors when it comes to various parts of the society, in agriculture, in desalination. We just saw an example here of various innovators who are coming forward with solutions. So sort of strengthening those kind of ties is really one key step in accelerating the kind of action that we need to see. I think there are a number of ways where to ensure that the youth have sort of their place in and their role in strengthening climate action. One, of course, is just securing that the youth voices are being heard, so making sure that those kind of platforms are available, both sort of within policy making, within implementation, but also when it comes to sort of identifying the kind of challenges that we have, that youth are sort of keeping us on our toes to make sure that we're sort of taking the right kind of decisions. But I think also, seeing youth as actors in society as they are, making sure that youth that there is access to education, that there is also awareness within education on climate action, and also providing opportunities for youth who want to engage in the solution. So linking that sort of to higher education, to entrepreneurship, making sure that there is sort of finance available for youth for youth innovators to sort of bring forward their kind of solutions. So I think there are many ways in making sure that the youth can engage in the way that they want to engage, and also maybe sort of being able to take the steps from being sort of not only making their voices heard, but also making them actors in the transition, and being able to provide the kind of solutions that they can offer as well. I think, COP28 delivered a robust result and a good outcome for us to build on. Obviously, any COP meeting needs to be a better result. We're still, as we said, lagging far behind when it comes to climate action. We're looking at the aggregate level of ambition. Emissions are set to rise by 2030, when we need to decrease by 45%. So there is still a lot more to be done. But I think the decisions taken at COP28 and on the new nationally determined contributions, which are to be delivered by COP30, so that next round of NDCs, as we call them, that they need to cover all sectors of the economy, they need to cover all greenhouse gases, they need to represent a progression in terms of emission reductions in relation to the present NDC. That was a strong signal to all countries, and I think it's important to uphold that kind of momentum also for COP29, to make sure that all countries are working on this. And when it comes to mitigation in particular, that all the G20 countries are delivering on that target. For them to, G20 stands for 80% of global emissions. So if we are to limit temperature rise to 1.5, we need to make sure that the G20, including the EU, are meeting those kind of targets. But also, of course, the more sort of the different parts of the COP28 outcomes in terms of the decision to transition away from fossil fuels and energy systems. I mean, first time we actually had that kind of commitment in a COP decision. We had that in COP26 when we said we'd be phasing down the use of coal, but now we're sort of broadening that to all fossil fuels. There's no timeline for that, so I mean, obviously that's something which we need to work on, but I think we also need to recognize that different countries have different timelines when it comes to the transition. And of course, we within the EU, we have a responsibility to continue our leadership in terms of the transition that we can make, and we're seeing also, with the kind of decisions that we've put in place in the EU, that we are now set to reducing our emissions by at least 55%, probably 57% by 2030. And we will be having already next week a new proposal by the European Commission on our 2040 target, which will be then providing the basis for our next NDC. So there is there was an outcome from COP28 which we definitely can build on to secure that we're progressing in accelerating action. But I'd also like to highlight, I think, the different types of initiatives which were launched at COP28. A number of initiatives when it comes to finance, a number of initiatives when it comes, we had the first ever Climate and Health Day with a declaration on climate and health, sort of highlighting the links between a changing climate and securing resilient health systems. And from a Swedish perspective, of course, I was very happy to see the number of Swedish companies present, being there to showcase the kind of solutions that they can offer in order to accelerate the transition globally. It's definitely a key issue for the transition globally to ensure that resources are as equitably distributed as possible. And we're trying to do what we can to ensure that the kind of development finance that we provide is sort of climate resilient, provides also that opportunity for countries to build resilience and to, again, also for them to see the transition as an opportunity in terms of the kind of jobs and growth that it can provide. Building new access to energy also provides new jobs. Making sure that infrastructure is resilient also provides new jobs, for example. So making the transition and making sure that the kind of development finance that we provide is geared towards supporting countries in the transition that we all need to make. But of course that also depends on that it's that we as a development finance provider and of course our development partners, we need to have that conversation on what kind of priorities do we want to finance, and how can we make minds meet when making those kind of priorities. So that's sort of one part of the equation, I would say. Making sure that that the more that climate action is being prioritized, the more of course that we can be able to provide that kind of finance. But not only sort of climate finance per se, but also sort of the wider development finance landscape to ensure that whatever kind of finance is being provided is also meeting whatever kind of climate needs there are, so that there is a climate, basically making a climate risk assessment in any kind of financial contribution that we make, so as to ensure that it contributes to the implementation of the Paris Agreement more broadly. But I think what we're seeing even more going forward, hopefully, is also sort of support to building financial markets, for example, because ultimately, public funds are limited, for any country. So there needs to be finance. We need to make sure that the financial flows more generally, which are available, are also geared towards supporting the transition. So I think hopefully that's something which we can be working with from the Swedish side as well, to sort of help build financial markets, to make sure that there are rules and regulations in place which incentivize investments being made in more climate resilient and climate friendly solutions, whether it's energy or infrastructure or regardless of which sector of the economy. And we're seeing that happening in both on the Swedish and European level, where banks, insurers and pension funds are making their investments moving in that kind of direction, both sort of driven by policy changes at the European level, but also because they see that there is there is sort of their business interest to make that transition happen, and for them to be financially sustainable in the long term, they need to make that move into those kind of investments, because if they will be staying in fossil fuels, that will be eventually that will be stranded assets as well. Oh, that's a big question in terms of the challenges, but I would say, it's very much about the leadership that we need in order for all countries to be able to make that kind of transition. So how can we as a global community be working together to create that kind of certainty and security for countries to be making the kind of decisions that they need to take, taking the kind of policy action which needs to be taken, setting the right kind of frameworks to drive that kind of action, creating the security of having the financial resources available, but also of course having the technical solutions available. So having those three elements in place in terms of the policy framework, the finance, and the innovative technology for all countries to do that, I think that sort of will create the kind of opportunities which we hope to see. But again, I look very much to the kind of solutions which business actors across the world can be providing for accelerating the transition. And of course, there are different roles for different societal actors. Governments need to put in place policy environments which stimulate these kind of investments and stimulate that kind of innovation. Financial actors need to make sure that their financial solutions can also sort of provide the finance needed for that action to happen, and of course unleashing the kind of innovative spirit and capacity that each country has to find the kind of solutions that they need to accelerate the transition in their country. So if we make those three elements meet, I think all countries have the opportunity, can strengthen their opportunities to transition to climate neutrality. Well, I think one perspective on that is that when we talk to our business community and ask them what is the single best method or single best way to accelerate climate action, most Swedish, or many at least, Swedish business actors would say that the single most efficient way to increase climate action globally would be a global price on carbon. So I think that sort of relates to your question in a way that the more that we can price carbon and put a price on carbon, the more we will drive investments away from carbon and from fossil fuel industry more basically. So I guess one answer to your question is that as long as there's profit in fossil fuel industries, investments are going to continue to flow in that direction. And then of course that is a choice for each country to make. How do you want to ensure the income for that particular country, and what kind of business practices are you willing to incentivize? And what is encouraging is, of course, that more and more countries are seeing that the transition away from fossil fuels is actually a business opportunity as well. That you're seeing that you're building new business models which will make your country more prosperous, which will make your country more resilient when it comes to energy security, for example, but also of course providing the kind of benefits you're seeing with climate action more generally in terms of health benefits, for example. So I think that's sort of a fundamental question that all countries need to ask themselves. How do we want to be part of this transition, and how quickly are we willing to make the transition and build that kind of economy which will be resilient in the long term? I think as a final remark, I'm just so happy to be here and really looking forward to exploring those ways how Sweden and Morocco can be strengthening our ties, specifically when it comes to climate action.